Evaluating moral arguments. This much is clear. We cannot escape the ethical facts of life. We often must make moral judgments, assess moral principles or rules, contend with moral theories, and argue the pros and cons of moral issues. Typically, we do all of these things believing that in one way or another, they really matter. Because we think that ethics, that is, moral philosophy, matters, it follows that moral reasoning matters, for we could make little headway in these difficult waters without the use of reasons and arguments. Along the way, we may take into account our feelings, desires, beliefs, and other factors, but getting to our destination depends mostly on the quality of our moral reasoning. Through moral reasoning, we assess what is right and wrong, good and bad, virtuous and vicious. We make and dismantle arguments for this view and for that. In our finest moments, we follow the lead of reason in the search for answers, trying to rise above subjectivism, prejudice, and confusion. In this section, you will discover that you are no stranger to moral reasoning. Moral reasoning is ordinary critical reasoning applied to ethics. Critical reasoning or critical thinking is a careful, systematic evaluation of statements or claims. We use critical reasoning every day to determine whether a statement is worthy of acceptance, that is, whether it is true. We harness critical reasoning to assess the truth of all sorts of claims in all kinds of contexts: personal, professional, academic, philosophical, scientific, political, and ethical. Moral reasoning, then, is not a type of reasoning that you have never seen before. We therefore begin this section with the basics of critical reasoning. The focus is on the skills that are at the heart of this kind of thinking: the formulation and evaluation of logical arguments. The rest of the chapter is about applying critical reasoning to the claims and arguments of ethics. Claims and arguments. When you use critical reasoning, your ultimate aim is usually to figure out whether to accept or believe a statement, either someone else's statement or one of your own. A statement or claim is an assertion that something is or is not the case. It is either true or false. These are examples of statements. Number 1, the ship sailed in a wind-tossed sea. Number 2, I feel tired and listless. Number 3, murder is wrong. Number 4, 5 plus 5 is equal to 10. Number 5, a circle is not a square. These statements assert that something is or is not the case. Whether you accept them, reject them, or neither, they are still statements because they are assertions that can be either true or false. The following, however, are not statements. They do not assert that something is or is not the case. Why is Anna laughing? Hand me the screwdriver. Is abortion immoral? Don't speak to me. A fundamental principle of critical reasoning is that we should not accept a statement as true without good reasons. If a statement is supported by good reasons, we are entitled to believe it. The better the reasons supporting a statement, the more likely it is to be true. Our acceptance of a statement, then, can vary in strength. If a statement is supported by strong reasons, we are entitled to believe it strongly. If it is supported by weaker reasons, our belief should likewise be weaker. If the reasons are equivocal, they do not help us decide one way or another. We should suspend judgment until the evidence is more definitive. Reasons supporting a statement are themselves statements. To lend credence to another claim, these supporting statements may assert something about specific evidence, expert opinion, relevant examples, or other considerations. In this way, they provide reasons for believing that a statement is true, that what is asserted is actual. When the state of affairs exists, when at least one statement attempts to provide reasons for believing another statement, we have an argument. An argument is defined as a group of statements, one of which is supposed to be supported by the rest. An argument in this sense, of course, has nothing to do with a combination of arguments such as shouting matches or vehement quarrels. In an argument, the supporting statements are known as premises. The statement being supported is known as the conclusion. Consider these arguments. Argument 1. Capital punishment is morally permissible because it helps to deter crime. Argument 2. If John killed Bill in self-defense, he did not commit murder. He did act in self-defense. Therefore, he did not commit murder. In argument 3, telling a white lie is morally permissible. We should judge the rightness of an act by its impact on human well-being. If an act increases human well-being, then it is right. Without question, telling a white lie increases human well-being because it spares people's feelings. That's what white lies are for. As you can see, these three judgments have different structures. For argument 1, it has just one premise, but arguments 2 and 3 have 2 or 3 premises. In argument 1 and 3, the conclusion is stated first, while in argument 2, it is stated last. Obviously, arguments can vary dramatically in their number of premises, in the placement of premises and conclusion, and in the wording of each parts.
But all arguments share a common pattern. At least one premise is intended to support a conclusion. This pattern is what makes an argument an argument. Despite the simplicity of this premise-conclusion arrangement, though, arguments are not always easy to identify. They can be embedded in long passages of non-argumentative prose, and non-argumentative prose can often look like arguments. Now let's consider this example. The number of abortions performed in the state is increasing. More and more women say that they favor greater access to abortion. This is an outrage. Now, do you see an argument in this passage? Well, you shouldn't, because there is none. The first two sentences are meant to be assertions of fact, and the last one is an expression of indignation. There is no premise providing reasons to accept a conclusion. But what if we alter the passage to make it an argument? Now let's see. Consider this example again. So this is a revised paragraph. The number of abortions performed in the state is increasing, and more women say that they favor greater access to abortion. Therefore, in this state, the trend among women is toward greater acceptance of abortion. Now that is an argument. There is a conclusion, the sentence that says, therefore, in this state, the trend among women is toward greater acceptance of abortion, supported by two premises, which are as follows. The number of abortions performed in this state is increasing, and more women say that they favor greater access to abortion. We are given reasons for accepting a claim. Well, the first thing to do when trying to analyze an argument is to identify the conclusion and the premise or premises. Sometimes people will use specific words that introduce the conclusion or premises of their arguments. So watch out for these clues. Logicians call these words or phrases conclusion indicators and premise indicators, respectively. And expressions like so, that's why, this shows that, or more formally, therefore, hence, and thus, usually come before the conclusion of an argument. Consider, for an instance, an argument that Obi-Wan Kenobi makes in the Star Wars film, Return of the Jedi. When Luke Skywalker complains that Obi-Wan had lied to Luke about Darth Vader having murdered Luke's father, Obi-Wan replies,
"Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true."
Here, The word so introduces the claim of which Obi-Wan is trying to convince Luke, namely, that Obi-Wan had told him the truth about his father. That's the conclusion of Obi-Wan's argument. Expressions like because, since, for, or given that usually indicate a premise. Consider, for instance, the following argument from the novel Candide. The main character, Candide, offers this argument when he arrives in a strange land where gold and gems can be found everywhere, just lying on the ground. The king's children of this country must be well brought up, since they are taught to despise gold and precious stones. The conclusion of this argument is that the king's children in this strange country have been well brought up. The word since introduces the reason that Candide gives for this conclusion, namely that the king's children have been taught to despise gold and precious stones. Well, you don't need to agree that this is a good reason to think the king's children have been well brought up. But remember, analyzing an argument is different from deciding whether it's a good argument. The goal is just to understand what the person giving the argument is saying. While conclusion indicators and premise indicators are often useful clues for analyzing an argument, you should always be careful when you find them, because they don't always introduce conclusions or premises. Sometimes they introduce explanations, the ping pong ball caught fire because, etc., or relationships in time since 1964 and so on. Thus, when you see a conclusion indicator or a premise indicator, you'll have to think carefully about whether it actually introduces a conclusion or a premise. Because in many cases, you won't get conclusions indicators or premise indicators to guide you. Instead, you'll just need to read or listen carefully to discover the author's or speaker's main point. That's the conclusion of the argument. The premises are all of the reasons that the author or speaker gives to support his or her main point. Note that the argument is sometimes presented along with a bunch of background claims, which are neither premises nor conclusions. They're just there to help you understand the meaning or importance of the argument. So, even if you know that a particular paragraph contains an argument, don't think that every single sentence needs to be either a premise in or the conclusion of the argument.